The fire is already lit. Sit down, breathe, and listen. Carl Jung once wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And that night, before the crackling fire, that was exactly what the silence seemed to whisper. Have you ever stopped to think why certain people in your life seem uncomfortable when you talk about your dreams? Why that longtime friend always finds a reason to discourage you when you mention a radical change? Why, every time you show excitement about a new opportunity, there's always someone close ready to bring you back to reality? There's a type of person you call your best friend, but who is, in reality, the unconscious guardian of your stagnation. It's not that they wish you harm. That would be easy to identify. It's something much more subtle and devastating. They need your company in paralysis. They need you to stay small so they don't feel insignificant. And as long as you don't break this silent pact of mutual comfort, your transformation will be impossible. No matter how many courses you take, how many books you read, or how many opportunities appear. In this video, you'll discover how to identify these guardians of stagnation, understand the perverse psychology behind this dynamic, and most importantly, why you allow them to continue existing in your life. Because deep down, maybe you're also afraid to fly alone. But before that, let me tell you about a pattern you probably recognize.
He was there again, at the same bar table, on his fourth beer of a random Tuesday, listening to the same friend talk about how working too much is for workaholics. It was the third time that month he'd mentioned declining to go out because he had an important presentation the next day. And it was the third time he heard the same speech, always accompanied by another round. Dude, relax. One night out won't kill you. You're getting too square, too uptight. Remember when we used to have real fun? Now you only talk about work, goals, this bullshit about professional growth. The curious thing was that this friend had been in the same professional position for 5 years. Same company, same position, same complaints about the boss. But he badmouthed everyone who got promoted. He canceled commitments, stayed out late, arrived at work the next day looking hungover, missed deadlines, skipped important meetings, sabotaged presentations through sheer lack of preparation. And the worst part, he started normalizing it. Everyone does this, he thought, as if professional mediocrity were an act of rebellion against the system. Gradually, without noticing, his ambitions disappeared. Not through great failures or dramatic circumstances, but through 1,000 small choices that pulled him away from who he could become. Jung knew there's a form of envy so subtle that not even those who feel it can consciously identify it. It's envy disguised as protection, as friendship, as genuine concern. Your friend wasn't saving you from the stress of professional growth. He was pulling you back to his level, because seeing you evolve would be unbearable for his stagnant ego. Every time you mentioned an opportunity, he immediately offered you an escape. A party, a bar, a video game, anything to take you out of focus. And when you accepted these escapes, he felt relieved, because it meant you would continue at the same level, that he wouldn't be left behind. It's a perverse form of sabotage, offering you exactly what your weakest part desires: immediate pleasure instead of necessary effort, comfort instead of growth. You've lived this, haven't you? That feeling that certain people only appear when you're making important decisions, always with a better option, always with something more fun to do. It's not coincidence. It's unconscious strategy, because they know instinctively that your moments of discipline are threats to the comfort of shared mediocrity. And you, wanting to maintain harmony and avoid seeming arrogant, ended up sabotaging your own goals to avoid hurting those who sabotaged you.
At 32, he looked back and saw an entire decade marked by the word almost. Almost started that graphic design course, but his friend convinced him to spend the enrollment money on an epic trip to Vegas. Almost moved to New York when the opportunity appeared, but the same circle bombarded him with stories of crime, cost of living, loneliness in the big city. Almost quit his job to try that startup position, but arrived drunk at the interview after a bachelor party that extended until 4 a.m. Almost invested in that idea that 3 years later he saw someone else execute and make millions, but was too busy with online games and series to focus on the project. There was always a voice, always the same circle offering a more tempting escape than the necessary effort. Dude, why all this pressure? Life is one. Let's enjoy it while we're young. And he believed it, because they did the dirty work of his laziness, his lack of discipline, his fear disguised as comfort. Now, scrolling through LinkedIn and seeing college classmates with their own companies, traveling for business to other countries, posting photos of Silicon Valley offices, a question hammered in his mind like an annoying song. What if I had resisted these temptations 10 years ago? What if I had been stronger than the need for their approval? It was a question that hurt physically because the answer was obvious and unbearable. Jung spoke about something he called destructive envy, a primitive form of emotional cannibalism. It's when someone, incapable of growing, unconsciously dedicates themselves to preventing others from growing, not through conscious malice, but through a desperate psychological need not to be left alone in mediocrity. Time is the only resource you can never recover, and some people in your life know this instinctively and use this awareness against you. They don't steal your money directly. They do something infinitely more cruel. They steal your years of greatest energy by offering cheap pleasure instead of real construction. There's an almost sadistic perversity in offering someone exactly what their weakest part desires, knowing it will destroy what their strongest part needs. Just one more beer, just one more episode, just one more game. Work is for tomorrow. And you give in, because resisting temptations alone is infinitely harder than resisting when you don't have anyone tempting you. But maybe, and this hurts to admit, these people feel a hidden pleasure every time you choose immediate pleasure instead of your long-term growth. Because every time you sabotage yourself, they feel less alone in their own mediocrity.
He was scrolling through the Instagram of a former work colleague, trying to pretend it was just casual curiosity. New house in a gated community, Tesla in the garage, family trip to Europe with photos in Paris museums and Greek beaches, post about company expansion to 2 more states. 5 years ago, they had exactly the same position at the company, same salary, same routine, same complaints about the boss. The difference was that the former colleague had left to become an entrepreneur, and he had stayed, listening to friends say it was crazy to give up stability, that entrepreneurship in the United States was too saturated a market, that he was too smart to fall for this business guru talk. But there was something more perverse in all this. He now realized that the same friends who discouraged him seemed secretly satisfied every time he failed at something. An almost imperceptible smile when he was rejected in an interview, and "I told you so" disguised as support when a project didn't work out, as if his failure were confirmation that they were right not to try anything. Now the former colleague had a company with 30 employees, and he remained in the same cubicle with the same salary that barely kept up with inflation when he was lucky, listening to the same friends complain about the life they themselves chose not to change. The worst wasn't the envy, He could rationalize that. The worst was the brutal realization. That could have been me, if I hadn't listened to those who secretly rooted against me. Theodore Roosevelt said that comparison is the murder of joy. But there's an even more toxic and devastating comparison, the one you make between who you are today and who you could have been if you had recognized envy disguised as friendship. When you see someone your age who took off, it's not just a matter of material success or social status. It's living proof that you were emotionally manipulated by people who benefited from your stagnation. Jung had a demolishing observation about this. Envy rarely manifests as direct hatred. It disguises itself as protection, as realism, as genuine concern. I just don't want to see you get hurt. I know people who tried that and got hurt. You're too good to risk something like that. Every victory you see in another is a painful reminder not just of the risks you didn't take, but of the people who secretly rejoiced every time you chose not to risk. And the most devastating thing is when you perceive the pattern. The people who most protected you from opportunities are exactly the same ones who show a strange discomfort whenever something good happens in your life. They didn't protect you from failure. They protected you from success because your success would be torture for their unconfessed envy. Maybe your irritation with others' success is just anger at having been naive enough to ask for advice from people who, deep down, rooted against you.
Now it's too late for me. This phrase echoed in his mind every time he saw an opportunity for radical change. At 35, he felt like he had missed the timing of everything that mattered in life. It was too late to change careers. Who's going to hire someone your age without experience in the field? It was too late to do that MBA. That's for young people in their 20s. It was too late to try entrepreneurship. You should be established by now. And his closest friends always agreed, with suspicious enthusiasm, for keeping him realistic. Man, this radical change thing is for people who are still figuring out life. Now you have responsibilities, mortgage to pay, student loans. You can't play at reinventing the wheel anymore. But there was something disturbing about how quickly they always had ready arguments against any ambition of his, as if they kept an arsenal of excuses to use every time he threatened to grow. It was almost as if they needed him to fail, as if his success were a personal threat to the comfort of shared mediocrity. Responsibilities, the magic word that transforms fear into virtue, cowardice into maturity, envy into protection. The fear of starting late is a psychological prison built specifically by people who are devoured by envy of those who still have the courage to try. Jung knew there's a perverse satisfaction in convincing someone they've missed the timing, because if the person gives up trying, they'll never discover if it could have worked. And this keeps the fantasy of superiority intact. They transform your age into an argument against your dreams, not because they care about you, but because your late success would be the most devastating proof that they too could have tried at any moment in the last 15 years. But there's a truth they can't stand for you to discover, because it would destroy the castle of excuses they built to justify their own paralysis. You're not late. You're exactly where you need to be to start something real. The 35-year-old who decides to change their life isn't an irresponsible person fleeing reality. It's someone who finally realized they were manipulated by people who find secret pleasure in others' failure. Jung began writing his major works after 40. Ray Kroc founded McDonald's at 52. Vera Wang entered fashion at 40. But I bet they all had people around them saying it was too late. The problem was never your age. The
The problem was always the people who turned your life experience into a reason to give up, because seeing you give up relieves the pain of their own cowardice. And maybe it's time to seriously question, where do these voices come from? And why do they seem to secretly rejoice every time you fail?
Carl Jung discovered something deeply disturbing about certain human relationships. He realized that some people in our lives are not genuine allies of our growth. They are unconscious accomplices of our stagnation. And they do this for a very specific psychological reason. Jung called this mystical participation, a toxic emotional fusion where two or more people create a closed psychological system that violently resists any change. In this system, your individual growth is not celebrated. It's experienced as an existential threat, because your evolution forces the other to confront their own paralysis. Your success becomes a cruel mirror of the opportunities they let pass. So, without consciously realizing, and this is the most sinister part, you make a silent emotional agreement. I won't grow, so you don't feel small. And you won't grow, so I don't feel abandoned. It's a pact of mutual mediocrity, and it works perfectly to keep everyone in the same place, until the day one of the two awakens and decides to break the cycle. Then the sabotage begins, subtle but relentless. Jung said that the process of individuation, becoming genuinely who you are, necessarily requires breaking these toxic psychological fusions. It's not cruelty, it's evolutionary necessity. Because as long as you're emotionally fused with people who need to keep you small to feel big, your soul will remain in an invisible prison.
But here arises the deepest and most terrifying existential dilemma. What if, by breaking with these people, you discover you're completely alone? What if these dysfunctional relationships were the only thing that emotionally connected you to the world? What if, without these familiar dynamics, however toxic they may be, you simply no longer know who you are? Jung knew this terror paralyzes more people than any rational fear. The dread of discovering that without these emotional crutches, you are nobody. But this isn't true. There's a temporary loneliness that is the inevitable price of psychological freedom, and it's infinitely more frightening than the familiar prison of shared stagnation. Because in prison, at least you have company. In freedom, at least initially, you only have yourself. And if you've spent years, maybe decades, avoiding truly knowing yourself, this intimate encounter with yourself can be absolutely terrifying. The question Jung asked was brutal in its simplicity. Do you prefer to be loved for who you pretend to be, or respected for who you really are? Because these two options are mutually exclusive. And choosing the second means accepting that some people will abandon you in the process.
They have specific psychological characteristics you can learn to recognize as behavioral patterns. First, they always find an apparently logical and rational reason for their objections. They never openly say, "Don't do this because I'm afraid." They say, "Don't do this because it's too risky," transforming their own cowardice into sensible advice. Second, their concerns are always generic and catastrophic. What if it goes wrong? What if you can't do it? What if you regret it? They never help you think of specific solutions or concrete strategies to mitigate risks. Third, they have an almost supernatural ability to normalize mediocrity. They make you believe that wanting more is ingratitude, that ambition is superficiality, that dreaming big is immaturity, and that settling for little is virtue.
Fourth, they feel visibly threatened by your small successes. A promotion at work, a new course that excites you, a hobby that awakens passion. Everything becomes a reason to subtly pull you back to their level. Fifth, they use your personal history as evidence against your dreams. You've always been like this. Remember when you tried that and it didn't work? You're not the type who... Jung said something devastating. Show me what someone fears, and I'll show you what they were never capable of becoming. These people fear your risks because each of your risks is a painful reminder of the risks they never have the courage to take. The separation doesn't always need to be dramatic or definitive. Sometimes it's a gradual and silent process. It's stopping asking for emotional permission from people who have an unconscious interest in your paralysis. It's stopping sharing your plans and dreams before executing them. It's stopping seeking validation exactly where you know you'll find sabotage. Jung spoke about psychological differentiation, the gradual but necessary process of distinguishing your genuine thoughts from the thoughts you absorbed and internalized from others over the years. How many of your certainties about life are just others' fears that you came to call wisdom? How many of your prudences are just other people's cowardice that you adopted as life philosophy? How many times have you said, "I think that," when you were actually repeating something you heard dozens of times? The separation process is psychologically painful because it forces you to assume total responsibility for your existence, without excuses, without alibis, without anyone to blame if things go wrong, but also without anyone to diminish or relativize your victory when things go right. It's a high price, but it's the price of real freedom. Carl Jung lived this brutal dynamic in his own skin. When he made the decision to intellectually break with Freud, his mentor, father figure, and scientific reference, it wasn't just a theoretical disagreement, it was an existential rupture. Many colleagues abandoned him. He was criticized, questioned, academically isolated. He spent years being treated as a traitor to serious psychoanalysis. But it was exactly in this period of intellectual loneliness and professional ostracism that Jung developed his most revolutionary and lasting theories. Jung wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." Awakening, this process of becoming genuinely who you are, requires the courage to disappoint people, to be misunderstood, to carry alone, at least temporarily, the full weight of your choices. History is full of people who had to choose between social approval and personal authenticity, between belonging and growth, between emotional security and psychological freedom. None of them, absolutely none, regretted choosing freedom. Many deeply regretted taking so long to choose it. That night, before the fire crackling in silence, he finally understood a devastating truth. It's not the explicitly bad people who destroy your dreams. It's the good people who care about you, who gently convince you to give them up in the name of sensibility and maturity. It's not declared enemies who trap you in a small life. It's close friends who unconsciously need to keep you small to be able to feel big. And it's not cruelty or ingratitude to free yourself from this dynamic. It's the most loving act you can do, for yourself and, paradoxically, for them too. Because as long as you remain trapped, you're teaching by example that it's possible and even acceptable to live a half-life, and no one should learn this devastating lesson. Jung was right when he said that accepting yourself completely is the most terrifying thing that exists. But eternally rejecting who you could become is infinitely worse. It's dying while alive. It's wasting the most precious gift you received, the possibility of being who you really are. If this video made you rethink some relationships in your life, leave a aha and share in the comments
What was the apparently sensible advice that held you back most in life? That night, I understood everything. And since then, whenever the world weighs heavy, I return to the fire. See you soon.